It made our marriage very difficult because I started to hide my symptoms from him. With my former treatment provider, my husband would go behind my back and he would share his concerns with her. And he was very paranoid as well. And so, any tiny thing that suggested I might be hypomanic, he was running to her with his concerns. And she would listen to him. And I would, appear at an appointment. And she said, well, your husband called me and he said, da 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 da. And, that was really upsetting to me because I didn't know in advance. And I didn't know what he was saying to her. So I didn't know how to defend myself in terms of those actions and saying, no, he's overreacting. And it made our marriage very difficult because I started to hide my symptoms from him because I was afraid that he would go to her to express his concerns. And so, and one time it led to a manic episode and a hospitalization because I did that. And the way, when I started to see my new treatment provider, I really placed boundaries on him. And I said to him, you are important to my care. I recognize that because when I start to become hypomanic, I don't realize it sometimes. And also, truth is, people with bipolar like to be in hypomania. We don't want it to stop. And so I recognize that he played an important role in my care, but I told him it has to be a role that we agree to together so that we're both comfortable with your participation. And so what we agreed upon was that instead of calling my doctor without me knowing or calling him independently, we agreed that he would share his concerns in an email and I would be copied in the email. And that was it. It was a very simple, request on my part, because then I would be part of the communication. I think all three people have to be on the same page and working together because, the natural feeling for a patient is that, we're the sick one. So our caregivers are always going to be believed more than we are because we're the sick one and they're not sick. And so it really impairs trust when you have that breach of communications and you're not part of it. You become, you don't trust your caregiver as much, you don't trust your treatment provider as much, you're suspicious, and you're worried about what might be being said about you. So I think family is incredibly important to treatment, but it has to be the right collaborative approach that includes all three parties. So all three parties are comfortable with the communications. And people with mental illness too, they have to accept that their families play important roles. And so sometimes we don't want to acknowledge that. And that was the case for me too. And so it has to be a collaboration with all three. And also I really feel too that the treatment provider has to educate our caregivers on our illness. So they don't have, so that they don't get overly concerned about certain behavior that they're observing. Because when you have bipolar, there's a tendency to helicoptering. And, they're just, my caregiver was just circling around me, waiting for the next sign. And they're always expecting the worst. And maybe if the treatment provider, had educated my caregiver on what is a symptom to be concerned with and had educated him on my baseline. My baseline had always been to be extroverted. And so, just because I'm showing a little, I spent a lot of time in depression, and every once in a while I would wake up more enthusiastic and, or I'd talk to more people. And, that's not necessarily hypomania, that's my baseline. And so they have to be able to distinguish between the two. And that's where I think that the treatment provider can step in and educate the caregiver in addition to educating ourselves. I think we both need education on our illness.